It is exactly 2 o'clock. We have 5 members here, so that is a quorum for the 8 active members on the board that we currently have. Good afternoon, you all. I would like to just acknowledge our outgoing chair, Janet Jackson, who could not be here this evening, but want to thank her for all of her service since the inception of our board. So we very much appreciate her. All right, first we'll start with the approval of minutes from the previous meeting. Has everyone had an opportunity to look over those minutes?
Yes.
Okay. Do I have a motion? Thank you. Second?
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor of passing the minutes, please say aye or raise your hand. Motion passes. Thank you. Next up on the agenda is election of vice chair. I have spoken with Dr. Jones to see if she would be willing to be vice chair. I think given Dr. Jones's history with both educating, training, and engagement with CPD, I think she's a good choice and option for that. She was open to it, so I would like to officially nominate her for vice chair.
Second.
And would anyone like any discussion?
Good choice.
Appreciate it. All right, so now we'll rephrase it as a motion. Motion to elect Chanel Jones, Dr. Chanel Jones as vice chair of the Civilian Review Board.
Second.
All right, any discussion? All in favor, please raise your hands. Say aye. Great, motion passes. Thank you. She will be here this afternoon, and part of the documentation that we have from the training meeting, we will address at some point at the end of the meeting, but this is to help guide which training our 3 new members are going to receive. And just by way of housekeeping, we do have 3 new members who were approved by City Council. They are not able to be here today, but hopefully will be here for the June meeting, even if they are not participating yet, that they would be here just to observe. But I'm excited about that, and I don't think, because they're not sworn in yet, and I don't have all 3 of their information in front of me, I'll withhold announcing them just because I don't want to announce only 2 of them and not the 3rd, but we look forward to them being able to join us in the future.
I shall return. I gotta walk in.
All right, next up, we're going to start with a review of our March cases, followed by a review of our April cases. I want to give everybody a moment while Board Member Fluharty is out of the room. If your committee had any administrative closures, if you're able to order them to go first, just want to give you a moment or 2 to be able to do that. What I'd hope to do is in future meetings have our administrative closures at the top, so that way we could dispose of those a little more efficiently than we've been able to do in the past. We can't get rid of reviewing them, but I think we can at least put them at the top of our meetings, and therefore kind of get them out of the way for efficiency purposes. Yes?
Is it possible for us to order the cases the way we did in the past? That is, because they're assigned to 3 committees, we're combining the 3 committees.
Yes, I asked Nate to do that specifically because I want us to get started with doing administrative closures first.
Okay.
Across all 3, and then we'll go back to teams.
Okay.
Yeah, so once your team is reading off all the other cases you have, you can go in your same order. But I'd like to do the administrative closures in their own little chunk, so that way we can have more time to be able to talk about substantive cases when we need to. Hello, Board Member Strickland. Well, now we're back at quorum, so we can go ahead with case reviews. Board Member Fluharty will be back in a moment. All right, did anyone have, any of the subcommittees, mine did not, but did the other 2 have any administrative closures from your March cases?
Yes.
Yes, I thought so.
Yep.
You go ahead with those.
Oh, okay. I just have one. November 25th, 20. Oh, I'm sorry. 22-0522. November 25th, 2022, the Columbus Department of Inspector General received a citizen complaint alleging that a female street worker was arrested for solicitation and transported to Jackson Pike after being sexually assaulted. The complaint states the woman should not have been taken into custody for a minor misdemeanor, but taken to a hospital. After 3 attempts over a 2-week period to reach the complainant, who reported the complaint for the involved complainant, the DIG had insufficient information to review and investigate the allegation. Therefore, the DIG recommends this allegation be closed administratively. Our subcommittee concurred, so I motion that we as a board accept the finding of administratively closed for case number 22-0522.
I'll second.
Any questions or discussion? All right, motion carries. Oh, sorry. First, let's vote. All in favor? All in favor, please raise your hands. All right, now motion carries. Thank you, Board Member McIntosh. Any other administrative closures in April for any group?
Sorry, in April or in March?
That was March.
I had a
Oh, you didn't-
withdrawn. Is that-
Go ahead. Yeah. No,
Yeah.
that counts.
We had complaint withdrawn. I'll read the number here as I pull it up. So this was case number 0513. This is Columbus Department of Inspector General received a complaint alleging that one of the complainants had been shot and drove to Mount Carmel East Hospital. They alleged that while at the hospital, a CPD detective took his keys and phones and searched the car he was driving without a search warrant, even though the shooting did not occur in his car. The investigation revealed that CPD responded to Mount Carmel East Hospital and conducted an investigation into the incident. The complainant was not cooperating with CPD during the investigation, and it seems that the Department of Inspector General reached out to the complainant, who stated that his property was returned throughout as they were navigating through this course of investigation, and he wished to withdraw his complaint. The Department of Inspector General recommends that this allegation be closed exonerated. So this is a little bit, it's exonerated, but they withdrew this complaint, as the officer's actions did not violate any policy and or procedure. Our subcommittee had no issues with this particular incident. So we would recommend, we agree with the subcommittee, or the IG's recommendation of exonerated / complaint withdrawn.
Would you like to make that a motion?
I'd like to make a motion to accept the IG's recommendation of exonerated / complaint withdrawn with case number 0513.
Any seconds? Second. Any discussion or questions? All in favor of passing, please raise your hands. All right, motion passes. Thank you. All right, is that all the administrative closures or withdrawals for March and April? All right. Moving then to the remaining team reviews. If we could hear from Team 1, Pastor Nathan, for your March cases.
Okay, this is complaint number, I'm going to just do 524 as opposed to the 2022. This is complaint number 524. The complainant alleged that the officer, that an officer with a certain cruiser rolled down his window in front of the complainant's home and yelled a rude and obscene comment to the complainant, and said that he should have pulled you out of your car at gunpoint. The GPS records as well as body-worn camera do not show that the cruiser was in the area. Therefore, there was a finding of unfounded. We agree with that. So I make a motion that the Inspector General's conclusion of unfounded be accepted in case number 524.
Any seconds? Seconds. Or any discussion?
Were there any concerns or questions that you had in that particular case?
No, there wasn't any corroborating evidence or witnesses to the event. It took place at 3 a.m. in the morning, where it would be unlikely to have had any any corroboration. So it is a peculiar complaint for sure to allege out of nothing, but we just found no evidence to support the allegation other than the complainant's statement.
And for those who are interested, they were able to review 3 different cruisers within 300 meters of the complainant's home, so in the neighborhood, but none of them were ever on his street, which is where he alleged that this occurred. So there's evidence that no officer's cruiser was there in front of his house.
Yeah, so you didn't just get there was nothing on the GPS or on the body-worn camera to corroborate the allegation. So I'm moving to accept the Inspector General's finding of unfounded in
We have
case
a-
number 524.
We've got a second from Dr. Jones. Any other questions or discussion? All in favor, please raise your hands. Motion carries. Thank you.
These are combined cases 542, 543, 549, and 551. This arose as a result of the Holly Drag Storytime event in Clintonville, and there were 2 allegations made regarding this. Complainant number 1, who was not present at the event, alleged that the Columbus Police Department was not present at the Holly Drag event, and that was found, the Inspector General concluded that was unfounded. There were, in fact, 30 CPDO officers at the event. Complainants number 2, 3, and 4 alleged that an officer offered support by high-fiving a member of the Proud Boys. In this case, there was no violation of CPD policy, and it was not a statement of support for the Proud Boys. This was a specially trained group of officers that were specifically trained to de-escalate difficult demonstrations. They appear to have been both well-trained and followed their training. They supported the right to protest. The body-worn cameras showed real carefulness in their comments. And so regarding the charge of having violated CPD policy, the Inspector General found that the officer to be exonerated. We agreed with that finding. So in cases number 542, 543, 549, and 551 regarding allegation number 1, we agree, I'm moving to agree with the Inspector General's finding of unfounded concerning the officers not being present, and exonerated concerning any violation of CPD policy for high-fiving one of the Proud Boys.
Second.
Any discussion or questions?
I do want to make a comment that I think was left out of the discussion, and it was in reference to you getting a little bit more context about the joke that was allegedly made. And so the IG did report that it was referenced that the joke was related related to the officer's success in actually directing traffic in cars around that area that particular day. And so we just thought, for the record, that people should know what the context of that joke centered on.
Could you elaborate that a little bit?
No.
Okay, is there any sort of elaboration about the specifics of the joke, or no's?
No.
No, just that it was in reference to the job the officer did directing traffic and parking right in the area right where it happened.
The record also, I would like to put on the record that the officers appear to be doing exactly what we want officers to do. which is to de-escalate fraud situations. Their training seems to have been really great, and this particular unit seemed to have handled the crowds and the situation well. So, yes.
Was there something about some education being done as it relates to officers as far as the optics being a little bit, maybe not what we would want to see, the high-fiving of a specific group that might not be so appreciated by all in the community? I believe I heard something that there was going to be some education. You might know about this, as far as educating individuals so as maybe not to high-five a group like this. Wasn't there something like this?
I believe there was a statement that Chief Bryant made about the need for being aware of optics.
Yeah.
Part of the report does talk about how this specific team of officers, they're called the Dialogue Officer Team, and they're specifically deployed when there's a First Amendment rally or thing happening. And so their purpose is specifically to build rapport with and keep the First Amendment protesters calm, and that's kind of where their focus was. The officer, the sergeant, I think it was, who did the high five, did discuss understanding kind of what the optics could look like, but they reiterated to the Proud Boys repeatedly that they don't support their ideals, that they were not there for those purposes, that they were there to make sure that their First Amendment rights were being adhered to. The report also, and it's a pretty lengthy report, the report also does detail how when Proud Boy members were trying to take photos, how the officers intentionally stepped out of the way so they wouldn't be seen as being kind of supportive or jovial or getting into pictures with them. So they were very aware of kind of that optic as well and trying to avoid that. They did talk about how, however, when the little kind of laughter and the high five happened, the sergeant did discuss how he considered how not high-fiving the Proud Boy member at that time, when he made a reference to how good of a job he did with directing traffic, would have negatively impacted their purpose in trying to keep them from getting rowdy or violent or whatnot. So there was a lot of discussion of those nuances, both in the report and between the IG investigative staff and the sergeant.
I mean, I have a question in terms of what is going to happen moving forward. I know there was indication that the chief indicated that they would use this particular incident as a training, moving forward. My question is, what exactly does that mean? Because the optics, to me, I mean, it's pretty bad optics, and the notion that was done in a way to de-escalate, to me, I don't necessarily know if that even aligns with best practices. And so I'm a little concerned that, we're going to just kind of go ahead and move along with this one without any other set of recommendation moving forward here, because if it's not a violation of policy, then what's to stop this from happening again? And I think, I know personally the optics don't look great. And then also, I think the uproar that after this happened indicates that others feel that way as well. And so I just am a little concerned that if this is kind of within policy and that this is going to be the policy moving forward, that we're going to run into a situation like this again. Not to mention that we've just had some incidents this past weekend in terms of with protesters coming down here. So is there any steps that,
Well, this was a team that was sent to Europe for training. It appears that, I don't know if there was anything about high-fiving, but that they were operating according to best practices in general. So officer who was charged with high-fiving can be heard on his body-worn camera to be saying that they're not there to collect information, to build cases, to make arrests. They're there to protect First Amendment rights, and that it's important to build rapport. They repeatedly said to reporters as well as others that they would not share any personal opinions about the situation. They're government employees. They're there to do a professional job, and on and on. So I'm not sure what else, other than not having contact with anyone, additional training would advance this. This is a specially trained unit that we've sent to Europe to get best practices, so.
I think one thing we could do, which we've done in other cases, I think back to a couple of cases we had where we were concerned about responses in DV calls. We were also concerned about policies or practices when there are unclothed persons, is we have made recommendations before where we agree with the finding. We don't trouble the finding of the IG, but we also make a recommendation for additional training. And then that goes up the chain with the chief of police. I mean, because this is a case in which the chief has already made a statement about training, I feel like there's space here that if anyone wants to amend the motion to include training, that's not far off from what we have done before in scenarios where there's no violation of policy, but we think that there should be another look at something that happened or something that repeatedly happens. Ms. Ross?
I would only suggest in that particular instance that you vote to either accept or agree with the IG's finding and then just close that out, period. And then if you're going to make a separate recommendation to CPD, do that separate and apart from the officer's report.
Okay. Does that make sense, or is that something?
That makes sense.
I think it's a good idea to keep in mind that you can protect First Amendment rights without interacting with the individuals who are protesting. I mean, the Skokie case, for instance, I mean, those individuals who were protecting didn't have to interact with the individuals who were protesting there. I mean, you have to be, especially if you receive this much training, you're a sergeant, you need to be aware of what you're doing and maybe just a little bit more awareness. Sure, they followed policy, but we all make, in the heat of the moment, we all do things. But being in that position, especially with an organization like the Proud Boys and what was going on, you just have to be very aware of your actions, I think.
All right, but I
agree.
had friends that were there on the other side and commented how great the police were, that how great the interaction was. And I think there was involvement with both groups, actually a lot. I think that one unfortunate circumstance is what got brought to light, but I think there was interaction with both groups quite a bit, actually.
Yeah, I mean, I think the training aspect, I think that element of it certainly makes sense. I do think a review of policy here, because I'm not necessarily comfortable with the idea that if this happens again, and we're just like, well, it's within policy that, you high five. I don't think that is necessarily the optics we're going for moving forward. And so, I would hope that if we move forward on this, that we actually do make an amendment in terms of including with additional review of policy and training. Obviously, I know this has been mentioned, but I would like that to be attached to this specific case because of what it has led to more broadly, and the fact that this could happen again.
So I think in terms of keeping the two separate, we vote on the IG's finding and then discuss how to move forward with CPD in terms of making that recommendation. And if you have, what that proposed recommendation would be. But I think we also need to address the context of that. The guy was making a comment of the officer about directing traffic, high five and stuff. So, how do we integrate like them to be, for training? Like, how do you train in terms of the response to that? So that's something we should think about, but I think we should keep the two separate. So if we could vote on the IG's findings, and then we can further discuss what this proposed recommendation for policy should be.
I mean, is there a particular reason to keep them separate? I'm just trying to.
Well, we're accepting the IG's findings, and then we're saying, that there was no violation.
Yeah, I mean.
And I
yeah.
think if I could, Board Member Strickland, so by attaching, and this is just my thinking out loud, by attaching it specifically to this sergeant's behavior, I think we're saying we want this sergeant to be retrained. I think by making a separate motion and saying we would like there to be either a review of how this particular training is integrated with cultural competence and cultural awareness, I think that can be a broader applied to the whole police force, not necessarily this one
Incident.
officer.
So I'm speaking to the specific policy itself, right? And then the training, which the police chief indicated herself that this would be used as a tool. I don't think about that individual officer. I thought it was related to the CPD dialogue team generally. So that's kind of what I'm referencing. But if we need to separate, I'm not sure.
Ms. Ross and I have talked about this previously and have both have directed the board prior that they should be separate because you're making a separate decision on the IG's recommendations, but then feel that there might be some tangential issue that you want to make a motion on. I've been looking through the code in terms of, duties and responsibilities. And so, I think that there's a subsection here to make recommendations to the police regarding policies and procedures. So yes, they should be separate. The second thing that I would say, and again, I don't want to kind of go too far afield in terms of what my role is as legal counsel, but you definitely want to make sure that you're kind of staying in your lane in terms of duties and responsibilities as a board, in terms of finding whether there's been excessive use of force or a violation of policy. You don't want to, yes, you have some authority to make recommendations regarding policies, procedures, training, but you want to be careful not to stray into the minutia of kind of how all of that plays out in the field. Officers are acting in real time, making thousands of decisions very quickly over the course of hours at any part, and everything is case specific and dependent on the specific facts and circumstances of a particular situation. And there has to be some leeway, if you will, for them to be able to work within a policy. And yes, optics are important, but optics are not policy, right? So, there was a finding here that they acted within policy. Yes, some of the optics associated with acting within that policy may not have been preferred, and that be maybe something that the chief can work with the officers about, but it may not result, like even if you make the recommendation, they may not change the policy. They may just kind of use this as a learning tool for this particular set of facts and circumstances. So you just want to be careful in terms of how far you stray.
And just generally with regard to like an investigative finding for a particular officer, if you're going to exonerate the officer and say that he hasn't done anything wrong, asking for remedial training would be a disciplinary action in the event he did something wrong. So that is why you want to keep that kind of separate. So right now, if we're saying, hey, while we maybe don't agree with the policy or don't agree with the optics, he's not going to be disciplined for having done anything outside of policy. And then separate and apart from that, we may make a statement or send something to CPD with a recommendation with regard to training more broadly or policy more broadly.
Right.
So you don't want to muddy up the investigative finding because that's going to go through an entire process. And we want to make sure your investigative finding doesn't get thrown out or recommendation for discipline doesn't get thrown out because you've muddied up kind of.
How would so I agree with not muddying up, but how would the recommendation get thrown out if it's a discretionary, if the recommendation itself is discretionary?
What I'm saying is just like common sense. If you're going to say, hey, we recommend that the IG's finding of exonerated be accepted and sent on. So he didn't do anything wrong, but we can't then say, well, we want remedial training to happen because we're saying he didn't do anything wrong
Well, I mean,
for that particular officer.
I guess the specifics, we can do it separate, but the specifics for the training, at least what I'm suggesting is for the CPD dialogue.
Yeah, and just do that separately and apart. So you want to vote on the motion for the investigative finding, be done with that, send that up its separate chain, and then have your discussion afterwards with regard to the more broader issues.
Okay, we've got first and seconds already on the table. Barring any further discussion, before we move on to the separate question, all in favor, please say aye. All right, motion carries. All right, next up, so to talk about what to do or what recommendation to make, do you have language for a motion, Board Member Strickland, that you'd like to put forward on training the dialogue team?
Yeah, and happy to get this cleaned up for it to necessarily to be. I'd like to make a motion as it relates to this specific policy that we just discussed for additional training and review of the policy itself relating to how the CPD dialogue team operates, in these types of situations.
Yeah, discussion?
Yep.
Yeah, I'm concerned about getting into fact patterns that if we reverse the situation and the CPD officer was high-fiving with one of the dancers or folks on the other side, would we have difficulty with that if the exact same situation, that is that they were being complimented for handling the situation well and directing traffic well, and one of the folks on the other side put out their hand to high five and they just stuck their hands in their pockets or didn't in any way acknowledge the relationship. We're getting down into human judgments that, really specific kinds of recommendations. I like the enforced neutrality. I like the notion that regarding First Amendment cases that we're supportive of protest on whatever side that the officer finds themselves. And this seems to me to be exactly what we would want. That is not the optics. I hear, depending on where we sit, the optics are going to land differently, but the idea that the officers are involved in de-escalating fraught situations. So when I read through the record, de-escalation was work, and if I reverse the players, and I say now the officer is seen high-fiving protesters on the other side, would that be problematic for you?
So no, I mean, I think the de-escalation point it is really where this is centered on, right? Where if you are in a situation in which you're high-fiving, protesters who are there specifically counter-protesting an event.
But on either side, would you have a...
but it's different as a counter-protester. You are high-fiving one of the counter-protesters who's advocating for all sorts of things about that particular group. The perception that actually doesn't de-escalate, that actually can further raise tensions versus in another situation, again, hypothetically speaking, where somebody is seen to be high-fiving somebody, I don't see how that escalates the situation.
Well, if they were counter-protesting, I guess what I'm asking, just to clarify our thinking, let's say it was a Proud Boys event, and there were counter-protesters to that who were upset with that group and what all they stand for, and so there were counter-protesters. The police came, trained to de-escalate. They were complimented for handling the situation well by the counter-protesters, and one of the counter-protesters put up their hand to high five. would we want the police officer to decline and say, no, we don't want to, we're not going to touch you?
If I could, Board Member Fluharty had his hand up, so I'd like to
Well, I think
recognize
that we're
him.
taking away from, the great job that happened over one incident. I had, like I said earlier, I had friends that were there, actually, they were the first people there at the protest, who said it was handled wonderfully. And yes, it's unfortunate that did happen, but we're detracting away from the fact that there was a incident in which Columbus PD done a great job.
If I could also, not that it gives any additional clarity, two things. First, I think that part of the community response and the reason why we got so many complaints about this is because of the, how the report described it, the Proud Boys being a neo-fascist white nationalist organization. And so, whether true or not, the fact that that is the perception does in fact play into whether the community feels as though, like, for example, no one knew the content of the back and forth, like that the joke is about parking. Community members did not know that that was what it was about, right? And so I definitely see that it is not a simple cut and dry, like, oh, everything went off fine, so we're good. The reality is community members saw that high five happen, and immediately that gives a perception. Now, whether that perception is true is a different question. And so I think what we have done before, and I can say as part of the Safety Commission, one of the things we looked at was training. We know that cultural competence training is a part of CPD training. It's not a big part. It's not several hours, it's not a day, and there is no intersection between cultural competence training that OPATA and CPD require and their other aspects. So example, with use of force, you're not also talking about cultural competence with use of force and how people of color or children might respond differently to uses of force. So the idea that we always integrate or cross-integrate our trainings is something that has been brought up to CPD as an issue before. I don't think it's problematic for us to recommend that there be a marrying of those programs, whether it is that dialogue team be conscious of, and maybe they already are, and we haven't seen the policy, so we don't know. Us making a recommendation that those things be looked at does not negate the good job that CPD officers did that day. It just asks them, hey, can you take a look at this and make sure that what we are training officers to do takes into consideration all of these factors. And so I don't think that a recommendation to the chief saying that is in any way denouncing the work that CPD did.
I would add to that, because I think we do know that multiple times we've been talking about the integration of training and how this stuff crosses over. But I would also add to that, part of the issue is the optics of what happened and the lack of communication between CPD leadership and the community, bringing some clarity in terms of the context that centered on or that led to that high five. And so what I would do is add to that training, just a simple note that when these high-profile events do happen, that CPD leadership or their communications team jump on it and provide some context, because context is key when these situations happen. We didn't know that what the joke centered on until you reached out and got some additional information about that. The public doesn't know what that joke centered on. All they saw was a police officer high-fiving a member of the Proud Boy, and so they can ascribe all types of context and information to that without knowing exactly what happened. And so I think the onus should be on our public safety leaders and our CPD leadership in, instead of letting these situations simmer like they have, getting ahead of it, or at least putting a statement out or something just to provide some context and communicate to the community what exactly happened. And that can also help address some of these issues before we get to this point.
And the point I'll also just add is that I think, there is no, I don't think you can equate right? And I'm not saying you're equating these situations, but in terms of whether the situation was different, while, folks have their constitutional right to speech, you also have groups in this particular instance that has indicated a history of intimidation, threat and harm. And so, the optics in this case are very different than if it were turned around, which is why, again, I'm not going to comment on specifically how, again, outside of our scope, how exactly CPD should be operating in their practices when it comes to the dialogue team. However, I do think a further review of what other best practices look like with the context of integrating these different trainings with a cultural competency is key and critical. So I would love to have that as part of that motion amendment to include that aspect that you just mentioned, Dr. Jones.
So just for the record, Board Member Strickland, you are amending the motion to include cultural competence intersection and communication around these incidents post-occurrence.
Yes.
Do you have that for the notes, Nate? Awesome, thank you.
Thanks, Nate.
Do we know if that training's already offered? Have they already been through it?
Which one? Cultural competence? Or
Yeah.
They all have, so the way that CPD trains, during the academy, they have so many hours of required OPADA training and local CPD training. Cultural competence is included, but again, and this is a recommendation that was made by the Safety Commission a few years back, that training does not intersect with anything else. So their implicit bias training is its own little capsule, and it stays, I'm just throwing out, stays in its own little 90 minutes, and then you move on to something else. But we don't do let's do Fifth Amendment, and let's talk about how that implicit bias may impact interrogation. Or Fourth Amendment, let's talk about how cultural competence impacts whether someone feels as if they're, can open up their backpack or refuse a search. So there is a gap between connecting your implicit bias or cultural competence with the other CPD trainings. So the Safety Commission made a recommendation that those already be integrated. And if they have already been, which I don't believe they have, but if they had, then that's something that our recommendation, the chief could report back, oh, that's already happening. I don't suspect that it is, though. Yeah, Dr. Jones is agreeing. It's not yet.
So there's two parts to this motion, as I understand it. One, Dr. Jones's motion that we have the CPD leadership communicate better in high-profile events when these kinds of things occur, so that we have the community has understanding regarding what exactly happened, because the community was left in the dark. That's one part of it, correct? The second part, I'm getting confused now about, are we simply asking them to take a look at cultural competence training?
It's the
what is the second
intersection
part
between the
from-
dialogue team and these types of incidents intersecting with cultural competence. And so to develop an understanding of how those things intersect and what the impact is, so that they're mindful of and hopefully in the future make choices in a way that reflects a full understanding of that.
I think the exact language we should just adopt from the Safety Commission, whatever that recommendation was, because that's basically what we're recommending.
I would agree with that.
And Nate's got us covered there with the precise language. You'll get
Nate's
us.
like,
Nate-
the Safety
it's the
Commission
it's the
predates his
language.
hiring, but.
It did predate it, but it's written down. It's
It
a
is written down.
Yeah,
yes,
you'll get
it's-
it.
it's-
It is a formal recommendation
It
from the
is.
Safety Commission
It is.
to the police department.
Yes.
So it
Just
And
is,
in
need to
addition,
find
we're
that, just
amending
that
with Dr.
language.
Jones's recommendation.
yes, Ms. Ross has it. Thank you, Ms. Ross.
I would like to review the Safety Commission recommendation before we move forward.
Reverend Tatum.
My question is in reference to these trainings, how often do they review them to see if they are still in line with what current thought is on how these things should be happening? Because if we're just going to say, we recommend, that we stay in line with current procedures, as far as implicit bias and all this other stuff, And say, for instance, that policy has been in place for the last 3 years. Things have changed over the last 3 years. So when was the last time that they may have reviewed these things, so that they can update them to what they would like to see happening with the people that are policing us? So that's my question.
So we could definitely have, I think, Mr. Furby come in. That's one of the requests, that he come in and give us kind of case updates that happen. OPATA updates are a little different, as are the CPD Training Academy updates, but I think we could probably get someone from the academy to give a report about that as well, because they gave us an overview. Those who are on the Safety Commission, we had an overview of what they had training on, and so we were able to see all the hours and the breakdown. So I think that's something we could definitely have. How about, for purposes of this, if we could table this for the moment, Ms. Ross, if between now and our break, you could pull up the language with that specific recommendation, then we'll come back, read it on the record, and then put it to vote.
Perfect.
All right, thank you. If we can move on to 2023-0014.
Am I continuing?
Yep.
Was there a vote on those 4 cases, though, or just in terms of the
Yes.
exoneration?
Yeah, there was a vote on the 4 cases, but a hold
The second
on
part,
the
okay.
second part. Yep.
I think we're on 0566.
Oh, is it? 0566. Yes, sorry about that.
Okay.
That's still 2022.
So this was an incident in a parking lot at East High in which 2 sisters were fighting. Officers came to break up the fight. There's 3 allegations. One, that officer used excessive force during the altercation. Number 2, that she was choked by one of the officers in being taken into custody. And number 3, that she was elbowed in the eye while being taken into custody. The body-worn camera doesn't support the claim of excessive use of force. On allegation number 1, the officer denied it, and there's nothing in the body-worn camera that suggests that there was force used to break up the fight. But regarding count 1 on excessive use, the officer was exonerated. In count 2, there's no evidence of choking, so that was found unfounded. And count 3, that the complainant was hit in the eye. There was no immediate evidence of bruising on the photos or the body-worn camera, and no additional documentation. The injury could have occurred during the fight, and so we simply don't know how this complainant's face got bruised. There were other bruises on her body as well. And so we agreed with the Inspector General's findings of exoneration regarding the first allegation. I'm trying to see if it's unfounded or unfounded regarding the second allegation, and not sustained regarding the third allegation. So I'm making a motion to support the Inspector General's findings with respect to case number 566 on these 3 allegations.
Second.
It's been first and second. Any questions or discussion?
I had a question about one of them says not sustained. Is there a reason there wasn't another term?
It was, I think, inconclusive. It wasn't clear. I think they came up with that because there was possible evidence of bruising, that she had a black eye. It just wasn't clear how she got the black eye. So I don't know if that would be unfounded or inconclusive.
So usually not sustained and inconclusive down at the bottom, it states that. And that's the reason why. It's just not enough information to either confirm or refute as to what actually happened. So we know it occurred. We just don't know how. So that's why it's non-sustained or inconclusive.
Okay. Excellent, thank you.
Any other questions or discussions? All in favor of passing the motion, please raise your hand, say aye. Any opposed? All right, thank you.
This is case number 571. Complainant was occupying an apartment that had been condemned as unsafe by the building inspector and code enforcement officers, posted a sign declaring the building to be unsafe. Construction workers saw the complainant in one of the apartments. They contacted CPD, and they attempted to get the complainant to leave. He refused to open the door. Construction workers then knocked the door open with a sledgehammer. The complainant was found inside naked with two women. There are 4 allegations. Number 1, that the officer forced his way into the apartment with a sledgehammer. That was, with respect to that allegation, the officer is exonerated because the apartment was forced open by a construction worker. That the complainant was allegation number 2, that a female guest was thrown against the wall. There is no evidence of it, that she was thrown into a wall. She did run into a door frame as she was seeking to get out of the apartment when the officers came in. So that, regarding that, the allegation was closed as unfounded. That the complainant's face was slammed against a cruiser window. In that case, the body-worn camera found that the complainant's body was pushed against the side of the cruiser. His face made contact with the cruiser window, possibly as a result of being handcuffed, but the officer did not put his hands on the complainant's head or push or slam it into the cruiser, and that his actions were supported by CPD policies. There was no excessive use of force. And so the officer was exonerated on allegation number 3 and allegation number 4, that he was taken from his apartment and arrested for trespassing. He was advised that if he returned to the apartment, he would be subject to arrest for trespassing. He met the elements for violation of trespassing, so it's recommended that allegation number 4 be closed as exonerated. And so we move to agree with the Inspector General's findings regarding these, their conclusions on these 4 allegations in case number 571.
It's been moved. Is there a second?
Second.
Any questions or discussion?
Did you all, your group, have any concerns or questions related to this particular case?
There was some confusion regarding whether he had been told by another officer that he could be allowed in the apartment. And so there was some confusion about this complainant's understanding of his right to be present in this apartment, even though signs were posted, whether he was previously told that you're allowed to be in there, but when the police showed up and he refused to open up or leave, based upon perhaps erroneous information from someone else, he refused, and that's what led to this chain of events.
Any other questions or discussions? All in favor, please raise your hands. Any opposed? And there was a second recommendation, or a 5th recommendation there on that case.
Oh, yes. I'm sorry. The Inspector General did find, they, on their own initiative, said that the officer was observed using profanity and calling the complainant crazy on several occasions, and so that they did violate several directives, CPD Directive 102, Columbus Central Work Rules Number 2, and Rule 8, with their use of profanity, and also Rule Number 136, Conduct Unbecoming. We supported that recommendation that the officer, that this be, that this be forwarded to the chief of police regarding possible disciplinary action in accordance with CPD policies and procedures.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor, please raise your hands.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, motion passes.
Thank you, Chair Brooks, for catching that. This is case number 582. The CPD was contacted after a physical altercation by the complainant and her significant other. There's two allegations. Number one, that she was unable to file charges at the prosecutor's office due to the officer not completing a report. And number two, that she informed the officers that she had a video of the incident that transpired. However, the officer never received the video footage. Regarding allegation number one, the officers didn't find evidence of domestic violence. There were no bruises, and this was controverted by her significant other. But the allegation that the officer did not file a completed report, that is allegation number one, was the officer was exonerated. The report was filed, but apparently there was a computer problem when the report was filed. And what happened? Somehow it didn't get into the system correctly. The system lost the data somewhere in the transit between the cruiser and the server. The officer in charge that heads up the police tech said that this issue is rare, but it does occasionally happen, and sometimes the cruiser's computers aren't connected correctly to the police net. And so in this case, the officer was exonerated because he did file the report, but there was a technical glitch. Regarding the second allegation that the officer did not review the Ring camera video footage, the officer did in fact review the video footage, and so that claim, that I'm not sure why this was unfounded and not exonerated. What?
Yes.
So down at the bottom, it talks about the footage was reviewed, and there was no physical violence or anything observed, and that was why it was exonerated.
But
I mean, unfounded.
It was
I
unfounded.
apologize. Unfounded. That's on the conclusion part.
yes, I got that. I was just asking about whether the finding should have been exonerated or unfounded.
Unfounded, we usually use unfounded when there is no evidence to support the allegation that was made. So the complainant was alleging, I would have to go back up, the complainant was making an allegation. Let me go back up to number 2. So the complainant was making the allegation that the officers never reviewed the footage, and the officers did review the footage. So we just found that her allegation was unfounded because
Exonerated would have been, officer didn't review the footage, but that's okay, because that's not a violation of policy, right?
Oh, is that it? Okay, all right. Great. So we supported the Inspector General's findings of exonerated regarding allegation 1 because of the computer problem, and regarding allegation 2, unfounded because he, in fact, did review the video footage. So I'm moving to support that in case number 582.
Second from Mary. Thank you. Any discussion or questions?
Could you explain this allegation or the computer thing? How was that resolved?
The report later did get uploaded. It's
Okay.
just initially, when the officer first attempted to do it, it uploaded a blank piece of paper instead of the report the officer had typed out. Later, the glitch was resolved and the report was there. It's just when he first tried to do it, something didn't work. I don't know the technicalities of what happened.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, and you could see in the system his attempts at trying to update it, so it wasn't like he intentionally didn't try to submit the report.
Okay. And then in these instances, are we, what's the process in terms of like complainants having access to resources or referrals? Like, do we have a process like that in place right now in terms of, like in this particular case, there's going to be, there are allegations made, and then there was a report uploaded, but there's allegations around domestic violence. Are there different, like referral processes that we put in place of like making sure that folks get connected to different agencies within the city?
Ms. Ross, since you're nodding your head, are there resources that do that connection?
Well, from what I understand, if the allegation that is being made, if we don't have jurisdiction over that allegation, we always try to find the appropriate agency to refer the caller or complainant to, whether that's another, internal affairs agency for law enforcement, if that's a mental health facility or social service. We always try to find another agency to refer them to.
Excellent.
We
Thank
don't
you.
just turn them away.
Yeah.
Thank you, Deputy Blunt. All right, we've got a motion on the floor in a second. Any other discussion or question?
So, my question, the Ring camera,
Yes.
that was the complainant's camera, correct?
And the,
Or a boyfriend. I'm not sure.
yeah, they both had access to it because
Okay.
his cell phone is what the officer used to watch it.
So the complainant would have had to have known that the officer watched it. And the reason I'm asking that is
No,
because.
he watched it with the significant other.
I got it now.
Any other questions or discussion? All in favor of the motion, please raise your hand. All right, thank you, motion passes. And I'll just note for the record that we are into both March and April cases, so with each group, we will just do all your cases. And I'm gonna go off order, and Board Member McIntosh, you can go next. Yeah, not right now.
Oh, okay.
When Team 1 is done, we always put you at the end, and then so therefore, if we're running out of room, you're always the one who doesn't get to finish, so.
Didn't we table 0586?
No, so we actually got, this was the response back.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Okay, sorry, Rich.
Okay, this is case number 586. The complainant, this involved a 14-year-old girl who was allegedly assaulted by a young man. In this case, the complainant alleged three things: that the officers made comments, that they had more important things to worry about than the complainant's 14-year-old daughter being assaulted, that the officers failed to provide their names, that's allegation number 2, and that the officers listed their daughter as a suspect when she was a victim of the assault. In this case, a review of the body-worn camera footage found no evidence that statements were made that the officers had something more important to do than worry about the 14-year-old girl. A review of the body-worn camera also revealed that the complainant never asked the officers to provide their names to him, yet The officer tried to provide the complainant with an information card that contained the incident number and the badge number, but the complainant refused to take the information directly. The body-worn camera found that, who is this other person? His companion took the card and also didn't ask the officers for their names. And so this, based on the information, it was recommended that this second allegation also be closed as unfounded. Concerning allegation number 3, that the officers listed the daughter as a suspect when she was a victim, the officer explained during the interview, after he talked with the juvenile agency about the charges, where she was listed as a suspect and a victim, there were conflicting stories here. Both parties were labeled as suspects and victims in this fight, and based on the information, it's recommended that the allegation be closed as that the officer be exonerated on allegation number 3, as the officers were actions were supported by CPD policies. And so moving on case number 586, that the Inspector General's recommendations be accepted regarding the conclusions regarding these 3 allegations.
Is there a second? Thank you, Mark. Any discussion?
So in this particular instance, when it's communicated to the complainant, the findings of the case, just to be clear, findings of the case are communicated to the complainant. Here's what we found. Just, is it like this memo, or is it like a summary of this memo that we received that the complainant gets, and then any accompanying materials that they can have?
I'm going to have, I know, our supervisor, Scott, some of the memos and stuff that's going out. I know they're just very general memos, but I'll have him answer because I know he has a chance to review, and then he does the same memos that goes out to the complainants.
Excellent.
Yeah, so some of the memos will look similar to that. It'll say, this is our investigative finding. They tend to be brief. They always have the ability to contact us. All of our contact information is down there. If I do one for another investigator, they can contact me directly. It just depends on their preferred method. Most of the time, we're asking at the beginning, what's your preferred method of contact? We may send an email. They don't, some people don't like attachments, so we'll just send them an email with the similar information. Some people prefer a phone call. We'll call them, or a letter in the mail. They can ask any questions they want about that. We don't offer, all of this specific information to them and send them an entire packet with the same type of information that you guys get. But all that information is readily available for them, and they're free to contact us to ask any questions, or contact the investigator or myself.
Okay, no, it's super helpful. And the reason I ask that is because in this particular situation, right, like, question as to why the is labeled suspect/victim, right? And this is helpful that there are other agencies that were involved, and that's how it was indicated. So I just wanted to see how that was communicated, but that's helpful. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
All right, we've got a first and second on the floor. Any other questions or discussion? All in favor, please raise your hands. Okay, motion carries. Thank you.
Case number 588, this involved a car accident in which the complainant was cited for failing to maintain an assured clear distance. In this case, the complainant became extremely belligerent, as indicated on the body-worn camera, verbally abusive, used racial slurs and profanities, and told the officer to F off. The officer walked, just a wide range of derogatory language. The officer opened the cruiser and quietly repeated her statement, "Okay, I'll F off." She alleged that the officer used profanity and was rude. That was allegation number 1. Allegation number 2 was that he failed to complete an accident report with insurance identification. In this case, the parties had already exchanged information, including the insurance information. His failure didn't result in improper accident report. So with respect to, I'm sorry, I should have said, with respect to allegation 1, that he used profanity, he was speaking to himself as he walked away, and so the allegation of profanity the officer was exonerated for using profanity. Regarding allegation 2, the failure to complete a accident report, the officer was also exonerated in that his failure didn't result in an improper accident report being filed. And allegation number 3, there was a claim that the officer said that if there was a report, that there would be no citation, and the complainant was cited for a failure to maintain assured clear distance. There was no evidence of the officer telling the complainant that she would not be cited if, in this particular case, on the body-worn camera. And so with respect to that allegation, this was found, it was unfounded, and so I move in case number 588 to accept the IG's findings of exoneration with respect to the first 2 allegations and unfounded with respect to the 3rd allegation.
Second.
Okay, we got a first and second. Any discussion? All right, all in favor, please raise your hands. Motion carries. Thank you.
This is now in 2023, case number 14. This was a dispute between the complainant and the son and daughter-in-law, resulting in allegations that her daughter-in-law scratched her nose and the police were called, and that the complainant alleges that the officers were rude and unprofessional when asking the age of her injury. That's allegation number 1. And allegation number 2, they were rude when they made a statement, do you want us to take her and put her back in a mental institution? This was the 2nd allegation. With respect to allegation number 1, that they were rude when asking about the age of their injury, the body-worn camera revealed no rude interactions, and there were no such statements regarding whether she should be put in a mental institution. And so with respect to both allegations, allegation number 1, they were exonerated for both officers, and allegation number 2, it was found to be unfounded with respect to both officers. And so I move to accept the Inspector General's findings in case number 14, 2023-14.
We've got a second. Any questions or discussions? All in favor of granting, please raise your hands. Motion passes. Thank you.
And this is the last one, while you recover from your stupor of listening to me here.
Wait, we've got 2 more. Second to last one.
Do we have 2 more?
0564 is after.
I've got one here. I've got number 21. This is a dispute between the complainant and her ex. There was a need for police intervention. The complainant alleged that the officers were dismissive and treated her as if she was at fault, that she was a drug addict, that she was crazy, that they used derogatory and vulgar language with respect to her, and also said, are you pissed that you didn't get your Olive Garden B? That was allegation number 1. Allegation number 2 was that they didn't handle the officers didn't handle the situation properly and did not do a field sobriety test on her child's father, who was allowed to drive away with drugs in the car. With respect to allegation number 2, that he allowed the officer that the officer didn't do a field sobriety test. There was no, let's see. I'm looking for it, excuse me. Well, let me do allegation 1 first, excuse me. And that is that the body-worn camera shows no use of profanity, but the officer's behavior was rude and unprofessional because he did make a statement about her being, you didn't care when you were eating Olive Garden. And so with respect to allegation number 1, that was closed with a finding of sustained, and with respect to one of the officers. Allegation number 2, there was a finding of exonerated because I don't think, I can't find it here, but that there was no requirement that they do a field sobriety test in accordance with CPD policies and procedures. And so it was recommended that with respect to allegation number 1, that there be this report be forwarded to the chief for review and consideration of disciplinary action in accordance with CPD policies and procedures. We support that recommendation of a consideration of disciplinary action for unprofessional behavior, and also support the Inspector General's finding of exonerated with respect to them not doing a field sobriety test. So I move to accept the IG's findings in case number 21.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Any questions or discussion? All in favor, please say aye. Motion carries. Thank you.
You're saying there's another case?
Yep, it's 0564. And I've got our notes if you need me to.
Okay, let me just
Okay.
see. 564?
Yep.
Oh, this was an anonymous complaint. Okay, yes. Okay, so 564, this was an anonymous complaint filed against the chief regarding football tickets to a OSU football game. And in this case, there are 3 allegations made against the chief. Number 1, that the chief asked for football tickets for her son for the presidential suite for the Ohio State-Michigan game. Allegation number 2, that she asked for an additional ticket for her security detail, but the security detail wasn't granted a ticket. And number 3, that the chief and her guests sat in the presidential suite while her security detail stood outside the suite. Regarding allegation number 1, the Inspector General concluded that this allegation that she asked for tickets for herself and her son was unfounded because she in fact purchased the tickets. Regarding allegation number 2, it was also, that was concluded as unfounded. She did not ask for a ticket for her security person, and the officer was not granted a ticket. He was, or she was working during the game. And concerning allegation number 3, that the chief and her guests sat in the presidential suite, it was concluded that the chief did visit the presidential suite and also other areas of the stadium to socialize with acquaintances, and there was no violation of CPD policy. And so in that case, in allegation number 3, the chief was exonerated. So I move to support the IG's findings in case number 564 of unfounded regarding the first 2 allegations and exoneration regarding the 3rd allegation, case number 564.
we've got a second from Mary. Thank you. Any discussion or questions?
So I think in these particular instances, is there a different process in when it's submitted? Basically, if there's an allegation towards somebody who's reviewing the case, who's also making a decision, like in this particular instance, does it navigate through the Department of Public Safety, or is there some sort of recusal process? I don't know how that even works in this particular instance.
What I can say, Madam Chair, is at the report, even though we did not find anything wrong, our recommendation was that the report go to the Director of Public Safety.
Got it.
The chief is not a part of the union that would be subject to the contract rules.
She's a manager.
Yeah, got it. Okay, that makes sense to me. Okay.
All in favor, please raise your hands. Motion carries. Thank you. Briefly going backwards, we did find the language that the Safety Commission had given. So Board Member Strickland, let me know if this language suffices to amend your motion earlier about a recommendation as to training and integrating cultural competence. Here's what the recommendations from the Safety Commission were. First, that each training module should be integrated with the impact of implicit and/or explicit bias, including racism, and strategies for officers to use in recognizing and mitigating their own biases, and require continuing education in this area following the academy. Second, that integrated into each training module should also be the impact of cultural competence and strategies for officers to ensure the equitable treatment of all persons, regardless of background.
I certainly couldn't have said it any better than that, so that's good to me.
Okay. So, Nate, if you could reflect in the minutes the amendment of Board Member Strickland's initial motion to include that language, but also the communication after similar incidents piece as well.
Absolutely.
Okay, given those amendments on the floor, we've got a first, do we have a second?
Second.
Okay, any discussion?
And so we have the two recommendations. We're voting on both. Or are we voting just on this?
Just on this.
Oh, okay.
Yep, because we passed the other,
Oh,
one already.
we passed the first part already? All right, thank you.
All right, all in favor, please raise your hands. Thank you, motion passes. All right, we will take a quick break. It is now 3:22. We will come back at 3:35, where Board Member McIntosh will get to go second.
6-hour flight from Maui to, I think we flew into like Phoenix, or Dallas, Fort Worth or something. Yeah, you don't get any sleep. Thanks.
Yeah, it was a.
You never make up next week. Give myself an extra day or something. Wednesday to Wednesday. So it's like, should I take off Thursday, Friday when I come back? Or part of me is like, oh, it's only 2 days, you just suck it up and go back Thursday because it's just 2 days, right? Yeah.
Always take the time. Always take the time.
Well, this is I'm not complaining, but I've been in the city for a year, so I get 6 weeks of vacation a year now. So, COVID, I didn't travel a lot, so once you hit like 400,
another live meeting that they have to be at that starts right at 5 o'clock. So we will plan on wrapping ourselves up at, let's say, 4:52-ish, so that they can actually get to where their other live meeting starts.
About 4:45.
I would love that. All right, now I'm going to turn it over to Team 3. Board Member McIntosh, it's your floor.
Case number 22-0453. October 19th of '22, an accident occurred involving a vehicle and a scooter. The driver of the vehicle was northbound on Neal Avenue. The driver of the scooter was southbound on Neal Avenue. Driver of the vehicle is behind another vehicle approaching an intersection with a traffic light that was green. The vehicle in front makes a left turn westbound. The driver of the vehicle involved in the accident makes a left turn right behind the vehicle in front of her, failing to yield to oncoming southbound traffic, causing the driver of the scooter to hit the passenger side of her vehicle. Because of the high number of accidents that day, by the time CPD officers arrived at the scene, both parties involved were already gone. The driver of the scooter was transported to OSU Medical Center. The driver of the vehicle continued on her destination, which was her workplace, unsure of what hit her or what she hit. The driver of the vehicle was later cited for failure to yield on a left-hand turn. Let's see. The mother of the driver of the vehicle filed a complaint with the DIG alleging, allegation number 1, complainant believes that the officer should have issued the driver a citation for hit skip and not failure to yield. Actually, when she got to work, she did contact the OSU Police Department and advised them where she was at. Her place of employment was not far from the accident scene, so she wasn't trying to evade or elude the police in that matter. So she was the officers was exonerated on that. Allegation number 2, the complainant alleges she tried to contact the CPD officer, but he never got back with her. That was found to be inconclusive. They couldn't determine, the officer stated that he never got a phone call from her. She states that she did contact dispatch, and dispatch told her, according to her, that her phone call would be returned in 24 hours. He never got the message that she tried to contact him. And then allegation number 3, complainant alleges there were issues with the accident report, such as no witnesses were noted, unknown contact with the victim, no information about the accident scene, and that is not accurate. The CPD officers did meet up with the OSU officers who were able to get to the scene. However, again, both parties were already gone from the scene. Any witnesses that were there, they were gone by then, so no witness information. But they did do a thorough report from the information that they could gather. So, I motion that we accept the findings of the DIG, which were exonerated for allegation number 1, inconclusive for allegation number 2, and unfounded for allegation number 3. Case number 22-0453.
Second.
Discussion?
Yes.
Was there, and maybe this is for the IG, was there no ability to discover, does the dispatcher not keep records of calls and also records of when they forward a call to an officer? This seems to be fairly easy to establish. whether the officer got a call or not?
I would probably have to do a little bit more research. I hear what you're saying, but I believe in the investigation, they looked to try to see who she talked to. She may have talked to ECC, and they may have told her that they were going to forward the call, but there was no information to make a determination of who the call, where the call was forwarded to. So she is stating that she thought that the call would be forwarded directly to the officer, and we're just not able to make a determination if that actually occurred.
So was there a determination, I mean, were you able to get any evidence about the dispatcher, or does it just go out into the ether, or how does that work?
When the investigator is looking into the allegation as to who she talked to, a lot of times we're able to search. If she makes a phone call, we can usually search by the person's phone number.
Yeah.
To see, in fact, who they may have contacted or where that number led to, but we weren't able to find any of that information. So we just were not being, it's possible that when she made the call could have went into a general number, which has, you know, all the different, if you connect here, connect there. So if you do that, your number does not copy. So it's not able to we can't track that number depending on how she contacted.
But she spoke to a person.
Yeah, but it's just like if you were to call 911, depending on how you called 911, if you went through a call center, the call center may not register that your specific number if it transfers you from one agency to another agency. It's just like we get complaints sometimes, and they may call a complaint, they may call one number that gets transferred to our office. Once it gets transferred to our office, we're not able to see specifically that number, where that number came from, so we can't track it. And in this case, when we were trying to track who she actually talked to or if her number got transferred to someone in CPD, we just weren't able to track that. And then CPD also has the substations has like a main number. It's not attached to a specific officer or a specific sergeant. So we just weren't able to be able to validate. And that's why we just made it inconclusive, because we heard what she said, and we can't determine whether or not it occurred or didn't occur. It's just that we weren't able to track who she possibly would have been transferred to.
So, yeah, thank you for that. And I mean, I think it might be helpful. I don't know if that's a technical issue or if there's a systems issue, but I mean, it seems like that might be a good thing to have, the ability to be able to track a number if somebody calls and then somebody says, you know, so-and-so will be in contact with you. And then if no one is potentially in contact with you, what the follow-up might be, you know, because I don't understand what the particular remedy in this situation could be if somebody called.
Isn't there a call log or something?
Yeah, that's what
Isn't there a call log on these 911 systems where they have an electronic footprint, where there's a call log on these things?
Probably for 911 there is. I think this lady probably contacted the non-emergency number.
Okay.
And maybe that dispatcher,
Okay.
the best that dispatcher can do is either email him, or she can call his substation, right? So if she calls the substation, a lot of times, sometimes people think that the officers are just in the substations, when most of the time they're out. So that phone may ring and no one may answer, or someone may pick it up, forget to give the message.
Any further discussion or questions? All right, we've got a motion on the floor with the second. All in favor, please raise your hands, say aye. Motion carries. Thank you.
All right. Case number 22-0531. November 24th, excuse me. A conflicting dispute between neighbors occurred concerning one of those neighbors' dog. The complainant and owner of the dog contacted CPD. The complainant states her dog was outside of her home on a leash. She hears someone screaming. Her dog went after the neighbor who was walking her dog. The complainant activates the shock collar, and her dog comes back to the door. The complainant daughter goes outside to retrieve the collar and sees the neighbor fire a handgun in the air. Now, that's the complainant's version. Officers get involved, and they talk to the other neighbor. Her version is this. She states she walked past the first time, and the dog owner's dog just barked at her and her dog. The second time she walked by, the dog came at her, so she sprayed mace at the dog and yelled, "Come get your dog." The two neighbors argued using profanity. The dog continued to come at her, so she fired a shot because she was in fear of her safety, up in the air. She also presented the officers with her ID and CCW permit. The officers explained that to the dog owner, that a report would be taken, and she would be given a report number, and she could pursue charges with the prosecutor's office. The dog owner or complainant wasn't satisfied with the officer's solution, and a few days later, she filed a complaint with the IG alleging that the Columbus police officers did not thoroughly investigate her complaint, that a citizen fired a gun while her daughter was outside their home, which is not accurate. The investigator actually talked to another neighbor in that neighborhood, neutral, who didn't see what happened, but when told about the dog getting loose, she exclaimed again. So there's history with the dog getting loose. Also, she relayed a incident that she had to rescue another dog from being attacked with this same dog. So the officers did find the shell casing. It was about a half block away from the complainant's home. So that is not accurate. They investigated as best they could. Allegation number 2 alleges that the Columbus police officer did not activate. There was 2 officers. One didn't activate his body-worn camera, and that was sustained. He did admit that he didn't activate it, and I can't remember exactly why, the bottom line, he didn't activate it, and he owned it. So that was sustained. So I motion that we accept the IG's findings of exonerated for allegation 1 and sustained for allegation 2, case number 22-0531.
It's been first and seconded. Any discussion or questions?
I just got a comment.
Yes.
About this. Did they happen to say what type of dog it was?
No, and you know what? I thought the same thing, and actually, I'm happy they didn't, because just imagine if they had said a pit bull,
pit bull,
or a Rottweiler. See, so then those biases come in, or if they had said a poodle,
Or Chihuahua?
right, and all of this. So I'm happy they left it the way
All right.
it was.
The resident did not have their dog restrained. You can't just let your dog run loose in the yard.
Right.
Shot collar or not.
So I do have a question generally though. So, if somebody fires a weapon into the sky and then it seems like the officers said to the neighbor that, they could talk with the prosecutor's office, but they didn't, the officers, and
Who
that's.
were they referring to? The person that shot the weapon or the person who?
The complainant. The
Okay.
complainant could go down and file charges.
So.
The dog owner.
The dog owner.
Okay.
File charges against the person that shot the gun.
Yeah.
But the officers, and I don't know enough about this, but the officers didn't think they should pursue that instance? They were just saying if the
Well-
complaint has something?
So what they were saying was that the lady, the neighbor that had the firearm and shot it in the air, was in fear for her safety because the dog was coming at her. So she shot the gun in the air. They certainly mentioned, firing a weapon within the city limits. They certainly mentioned that, and the officers acknowledged that, but they geared the complainant to the prosecutor's office, which is within policy.
Yeah, so, and I was just wondering in terms of the difference between a situation in which they would say, individual owner here, you can, if you want to file charges, you can go to the prosecutor's office versus, we're gonna bring this to the prosecutor's office ourselves. Since I was just wondering generally why that determination was made in this instance.
A lot of times when it's outside of their presence, and then there was conflicting stories, because the dog owner had one story, the other neighbor had another story. When there's kind of conflicting stories, they take a report, give the information to that person, and let them go down and file charges. So it still gives them an option.
I think what Kyle may be asking is, there's no conflicting story about a firearm being used, discharged in the city limits. We're in agreement about that. So what prevented the officer, was it the circumstances that we just don't know why? I mean, isn't that in itself a violation?
Well, I think, so just firing a weapon within the city limits, in and of itself, yes. But with a dog coming at a person, right, in an aggressive manner.
So they were leaning on the she feared for her life kind of thing? Is that what this is going? So they.
Or maybe not life as much as her safety.
Her safety?
And her
Oh,
dog's
okay.
safety, but she didn't mention her
Okay.
dog.
Could have just shot the dog and then, we would have had another situation.
That's
No,
true.
no, we would have had another situation.
We would
Right,
have
it would have
another
been
actually, you're right.
situation. Yeah.
Yep.
And there's a certain amount of discretion that officers have in making that specific call, right? About whether to construe that as, oh, she committed a crime versus we're saying that this was in self-defense
Right.
because she believed she was going to be harmed by the
Thing that
animal.
disturbs me, if that round goes up, it's got to come down.
Yeah, that's my concern.
Yeah, but if we take a look at New Year's Eve,
Yeah, they fire them off.
let them go, and,
Right.
some
Yeah.
they know and some they don't.
Mr. Tobias, how does, can you shed light on this? How does an officer make that determination?
I've been a prosecutor for 4 years, but last time I checked, discharging weapons was an M3, so it's a misdemeanor, and unless CPD policy has changed, they're not going to do anything unless it's on view, right? And so, officers are making discretionary calls all the time, and normal procedure for a misdemeanor that they didn't see would be to refer them, take a report and refer them to the prosecutor's office.
Okay.
There are going to be certain crimes where their policy says you have to make an arrest, or you have to charge, or you have to start an investigation, and there are certain issues where they have discretion to send those to us, typically for nonviolent misdemeanors, right, that are not viewed.
Yeah,
that they come to us.
one that I'm aware of is domestic violence is a
Yep.
preferred arrest policy, and if they don't,
Yep.
they need to pretty lengthy articulate in a report why they didn't.
Exactly.
Now, if the round would have came down and hit somebody,
Yeah.
then it would have been a whole different
Yeah.
ball game.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful.
Any other discussion? All in favor of accepting the motion, please raise your hands. Motion carries. Thank you.
All right. Case number 22-0599. December 14th of 22, CPD SWAT entry team conducted and completed a search of a residence. The lady of the residence on December 27th, 22, filed a complaint with the IG citing several allegations. Allegation 1, she alleged that CPD officers pointed rifles and shotguns at their minor children. Allegation number 2, she alleged CPD officers destroyed their residence and damaged several items on purpose. Allegation number 3, she alleged that CPD officers were rude and behaved nasty. And allegation number 4 was the complainant was told by CPD officers to sit in the paddy wagon even though she was told she was not being detained. So, after obtaining and reviewing a list of all the involved SWAT officers and CRT officers, an incident report, the CAD report, BWC footage for the involved SWAT entry team and CRT officers who conducted the search, the DIG investigator found, let's start with that first allegation. That BWC footage revealed that only 2 of the 10 SWAT entry team members were equipped with rifles. When entry was made, the complainant answered the door. The 2 rifles were aimed either towards the sky or towards the ground. The investigator did not observe at any point during the entry or during the officer's time on scene either of the rifles pointed in the direction of the minor children or the complainant. So that allegation was unfounded. In regards to allegation number 2, the investigator did not observe any officer destroy or purposely damage any property in review of the BWC footage. However, one of the officers closed a nightstand drawer and an item accidentally fell off the nightstand and broke. That officer can be heard asking what that was and looking around, showing that he did not knock the item down on purpose. The item was not picked up and thrown onto the floor nor stepped on by the officer or any officers as alleged. The residence was not destroyed. No property was purposely damaged. Allegation number 3, let me see. Yes. Allegation number 3, the investigator did not observe any CPD personnel behave rudely towards the complainant or the children. In fact, the investigator observed the officers behave professionally and politely towards them by trying to comfort them by saying how good they were doing, collecting coats for them, offering to carry the 3-year-old, and engaging in conversation with the young children. And allegation number 4. The complainant was advised that she would need to be removed from the house. The sergeant informed the complainant that they had a van available for her and the kids to sit in so they could stay warm and didn't have to be out in the cold. It was stressed to the complainant that she was not under arrest, going to jail, etc. The complainant did not state that she did not want to go to the van or anything of that nature. Therefore, no comment was made about her having to do what the officer said, or she would be taken to CPD headquarters. So number 4 was also exonerated. So based on the information and evidence obtained, Columbus DIG recommends that allegations 1, 2, and 3 be closed with the finding of unfounded for the appropriate officers, as no evidence that substantiated the complaints or allegations were found. And the IG recommends that allegation number 4 be closed with a finding of exonerated for the appropriate officer, as no CPD policy and/or procedure was violated. In case number 22-0599. Yeah, I already
Did you
motioned
make the
it.
motion?
Yeah, Yep.
Can we
Okay.
just amend those yeah, that was the recommendation, right? That was the motion.
Mhm.
Okay, can I have a second?
Second.
All right, any discussion or questions? All in favor, please raise your hands. All right, motion carries.
All right. Case number 23-0015. Okay. January 9th, 2023, Columbus DIG received a complaint of misconduct. The complaint alleged that on December 22nd, 23rd, and 30th, several officers responded to the complainant's address for calls for service involving 2 individuals coming onto his front porch, pointing a gun at his wife for vandalism and theft of his property. The complainant alleged that the officers did not take any reports for any of these incidents, and that one of the suspects was allowed to leave, even though the officers heard the suspect threaten the complainant. He alleged that the officer he was speaking to at the time told the suspect to leave. The complainant alleged when he asked why the suspect was allowed to leave after threatening him, the officer responded that it was 7 degrees outside. So just to be clear, allegation 1 is officers did not take a report on any of the several occasions the complainant called the police. And allegation 2, officers allowed the suspect to go even though the suspect continued to make threats against his life in front of officers. All right, so let's address those allegations. The IG investigator, after reviewing CAD data and unit histories for all calls for service and BWCs for each officer involved in each dispatch call for service, determined that 3 reports were completed after 6 calls for service. The first 2 calls for service was on 1 report, the first report. The 3rd call for service, a report was taken. The 4th call for service, a report was taken. The 5th call, the complainant spoke with a supervisor, and that supervisor had the officer complete an addition form for a previous report. The 6th call for service was canceled. So that's allegation number 1. So it's not accurate. 3 reports were taken in those for those calls for service. As for allegation number 2, the IG found no evidence to support this allegation. There were no threats made in the presence of the officers. The complainant was referred to the prosecutor's office to pursue possible charges. So I motion that we accept the IG's findings of exonerated for allegation 1 and unfounded for allegation number 2. Case number 23-0015.
Any discussion or questions? All in favor, please raise your hands. Motion carries.
Case number 22-0604. Let's see, on December 27th of 22, Columbus DIG received a complaint. The complainant alleged that she was involved in a domestic violence incident with her fiancé in the hallway of the hotel where they were staying. She alleged that she was strangled and that this incident was caught on camera, but that officers did not remove her fiancé from the premises. So her complaint is that officers should have removed her fiancé from the premises after their domestic violence incident occurred. Two different accounts, two different stories. So let me go through this. Certainly, officers were called. Her version was to the officers, she explained that she and her husband had gone out to a bar, that they had gotten into an argument towards the end of the night. They were getting off the elevator when she stated that he put his hand around her neck and began to choke her. So that was her version. She also stated that there was a witness to that. The fiancé's version. He stated that there was no physical altercation. He told them that she was upset because while they were out at the bar, he was speaking with another woman. He stated they got into an argument and admitted to getting loud when they were arguing, including when they were getting off the elevator. He stated there was no physical altercation and that the people in the hallway asked if everything was all right when he told them to mind their own business. The officer then spoke with the independent witness. The information given by the witness was consistent with his version. She believed that there had been a physical altercation in the elevator, but she did not see one and only heard the yelling. Although a report was completed regarding this incident to include citing that the officers could not determine a primary aggressor and that the conflicting information and lack of evidence did not rise to probable cause for an on-scene arrest to be made, officers provided information to both parties on how to pursue charges and ensured that both parties had their own space to stay in for that night. So the front desk clerk provided the female half with a separate room for the night or until her sister came to pick her up. She was given a different room, which was unknown to the fiancé. So therefore, it's recommended that this case be closed with a finding of exonerated for both officers. And I motion that the board agree and accept the finding of exonerated by the IG for case number 22-0604.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor, please raise your hands. Motion carries.
Case number 22-0612. Okay. On December 30th, complaint was filed with the DIG's office alleging misconduct by Columbus Police. The complainant explained that an officer is outside of her home in a cruiser every Sunday when her son is dropped off by his father. The complainant alleges that she asked the officer for his credentials and he refused. And number two, the officer was rude by telling her to get away from his car. And when she asked the officer, "Can I help you?" the officer replied, "Did I ask if you could help me?" So this couple was going through some court hearings for the termination of custody. It hadn't been determined. The male half, the father who brings the child, who has visitation every other weekend, brings the child home on Sundays. The police were called on one occasion stating that he had kidnapped the kids. And there was another occasion where the female half told officers that he was late bringing the son home. He was an hour late. There's not a court order for custody yet, so nothing's in place. So the officers couldn't do anything with that. As far as her two allegations, the complainant alleged that the officers refused to give his name or badge number was unfounded. The complainant alleged that the officers were rude by telling her to get away from the car. And the complainant asked the officers, "Can I help you?" The officers responded by saying, "Did I ask if you could help me?" was also unfounded. Go back. The IG interviewed the complainant, reviewed the video footage she provided from her phone regarding the allegation. That investigation found no evidence, and this was her video, found no evidence to substantiate the allegations reported by the complainant. And she herself stated that she did not have proof to back up her statements that the officers did not give her their credentials. So also in allegation number 2, there was no evidence to substantiate the complaint's allegation that officers were rude, and no comments were made to the complainant to get away from their car. Or did I ask you if you could did I ask if I could help, if you could help me? So therefore, that allegation was also closed, unfounded. So I motion that the board accept the findings by the IG of unfounded for both allegations in case number 22-0612.
Any seconds?
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor, please raise your hands. Thank you, motion carries.
23-0018. January 10th, 2023, complaint filed, a complaint with the DIG alleging misconduct by officers. She explained that she was involved in a hit-skip accident on Saturday, January 7th. The officers arrived almost 30 minutes after she contacted 911. When officers arrived, they told her to move her car. They took a report, gave her the report number, and told her there is nothing else they could do, and left. The complainant stated that she was unable to drive her car and that she was not offered a tow truck by the officers. The complainant alleges the officers left the scene of the accident. She called for a second officer to come out to the accident location and was told the run was closed. The complainant is alleging misconduct by the officers because it took 30 minutes to reach the scene of the accident, and the officers did not provide a tow truck for her. A review of the body-worn camera footage showed that the officers' actions were in accordance with CPD policies and procedures and/or laws. The BWC footage begins with the officers pulling up to the complainant, who was parked under a bridge, advising her that the car would make it to the gas station. The complainant relocated the vehicle to the gas station. The complainant explained to the officers how the hit-skip accident occurred. Officers checked her driver's license, registration, and insurance, wrote the information card with a report number, and asked the complainant if she had help on the way to pick her up, in which she applied, "Oh, yes." The officer asked if she needed help with anything else, and she replied, "No." Then the officers told the complainant to have a better night, and she replied, "Thank you so much." So I motion that we agree with the findings of the IG. For allegation 1, exonerated, and allegation number 2, also exonerated. Case number 2023-0018.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor, please raise your hands. Motion carries. Thank you.
Case number 23-0032. January 17th, 2023, the complainant filed a complaint with the Columbus DIG alleging misconduct. Complainant alleged that on January 14th, around 9:30 p.m., while merging onto 270 South from Easton Way, CPD cruiser number 9150 caused him to have to slam on his brakes and then ran him off the road, forced him onto the shoulder. The complainant alleged that while on 270 South, the cruiser continued to follow and tailgate him, even during multiple lane changes for several miles. The complainant stated that the cruiser was following his vehicle so closely that he felt that he was unable to brake without being rear-ended. The complainant went to CPD headquarters about this matter and was told by an officer at the front desk that this was reckless operation of a vehicle and was provided information needed to file a complaint with the IG. And that complaint is that he alleged the officer driving cruiser number 9150 recklessly operated the cruiser by running him off the road, forcing him onto the shoulder, and by tailgating him. Let's see. The officer's account is different. He was interviewed by the IG. That officer reported that he was in the right lane while merging onto 270 South from Easton Way, as there was a sign stating that the left lane ends. The officer stated that he noticed a vehicle coming up in the left lane, which then got next to his cruiser as the lane ended. While beside the cruiser, the officer stated that the driver of the vehicle flipped him off before slamming on his brakes and getting behind the cruiser. The officer stated that he let it go and got onto 270 South. The officer reported that the driver then went around and past the cruiser, and that the driver flipped him off a second time before getting over into his lane and cutting him off. The officer stated that the driver continued on as he fell back. The officer later got over and tried to pass the driver to get away from him or avoid any type of further altercation. However, the driver got over. At this point, since the driver had flipped him off twice and kept getting over every time he did, the officer stated that he maintained his distance, which he reported being between 1 and 2 car lengths behind him. The officer stated that he was far enough back that he could see completely under the complainant's vehicle. The officer noted that he was unsure exactly how many lane changes were made, but noted that there was at least 2 or 3. The officer reiterated that he stayed 1 or 2 car lengths behind the complainant at all times. Let's see, due to the complainant's statement differing from the officer's statement and there being no other obtainable evidence, video or witnesses, the IG concluded that there was insufficient evidence to determine if the officer violated CPD policy, specifically Directive 5.01 or Directive 1-01. Therefore, it is recommended that the allegation be closed with the finding of not sustained, inconclusive. And based on that, I motion that we also accept the findings of not sustained or inconclusive for the allegation in case number 23-0032.
Okay, we've got a second. Any discussion or questions?
The only discussion point of it, is there any footage from the police cruiser in this case, or there was just none?
No.
Okay.
There was no footage available at all because during the alleged time period, Officer Dodrell was not transporting an individual or completing a call for service, nor was it a self-initiated run. That was one of our first questions.
Got it.
Yeah, that was the
Yeah.
issue
I have a
here.
theory, Kyle, but I'll share it after.
Okay.
meeting's over.
Yeah,
And I even asked, thinking, because the officer mentioned, remember, that that person cut him off.
yeah.
And certainly those lane changes were probably without signal. So I questioned whether, or why he didn't pull him over. However, it was pointed out that if he had pulled him over, it might have looked like he was retaliating against that
Gotcha.
person. There's no law against flipping people off and those sorts of things. Yeah, there is. There absolutely is. But I think just letting it go was the better thing to do.
Okay.
We've got a first and a second. And discussion, all in favor, please raise your hand. Motion carries.
Oh, okay. 23-0039. The complaint stated that on December 6th of '22, she was being detained in a Franklin County Sheriff's Cruiser due to an unrelated shooting incident. The complaint alleged that a CPD officer escorted her to his cruiser and patted her down for weapons. During the pat-down, the complaint alleged that the officer touched her vagina with 2 fingers. The complainant stated that after she made it known to all who were present at the scene that the officer had inappropriately touched her, a sergeant and a detective of the sexual assault unit came to her home the same day to interview her. This complainant told the DIG that the detective was very helpful, but the sergeant was very rude. Her allegation was that the sergeant was rude and uncaring by talking to her as if she didn't know what she was talking about. She further stated that the sergeant was very short, to the point, and this made her feel that the sergeant did not want to give her the time of day, and it made her feel like a criminal. So the IG interviewed the detective and sergeant. The detective stated that he and the sergeant went to the home of the complainant, and at no point in the interview did he see his supervisor act rudely towards the complainant, and that she in fact treated her with compassion. The IG then interviewed the sergeant regarding the allegation, of which, let me just mention that neither the sergeant or the detective had body cameras on. However, however, they did have audio. They did tape the conversation. Let's see. The IG questioned the sergeant about the statement made by the complainant that she was asked by the sergeant, "Are you sure that happened?" The sergeant explained that she asked the complainant, "Do you believe he knew where his hands were?" Because that is important to know if it was intentional or accidental as a part of the investigation. The sergeant stated that she never questioned her as though she did not believe her, but to gather more information. Additionally, the sergeant stated that the complainant did not express any frustration with either her or the detective, and she had no idea how the complainant could have interpreted her demeanor as rude. The sergeant expressed that she does not have the best penmanship because she wrote out some information for her, and the complainant thought she just scribbled it in an uncaring manner, but stated that she was never rude to the complainant and believed she was more empathetic. The sergeant stated that when she was leaving, she told the complainant that she was sorry that she had that bad experience. The IG also reviewed a copy of the audio recording from the interview by the sergeant and the detective, and based on the aforementioned statements and supporting evidence reviewed, the investigation found no evidence to substantiate the complainant's allegations that the sergeant was rude to her and that the sergeant's actions violated CPD policy and procedure. Therefore, it is recommended the allegation be closed unfounded. And I motion that we accept the finding of unfounded for that allegation in case number 23-0039.
Is there a second? Thanks, Mark. It's been first and seconded. Any discussion?
Yeah.
Talk to me.
I'll go briefly. So, and I understand the statement about the allegation for the particular officers not being rude. I don't understand, did anything happen as a follow-up to the actual complaint that the complainant made about that situation? So that is one of the concerns I had was.
Very good.
Yeah.
We did. We asked that question.
Okay.
And so that is a criminal matter, and that matter goes to, that matter goes to IA, who does an investigation on that. Now, where that investigation is, I don't know, but that's a criminal matter. The IG may have something more.
Yeah.
Thank you. So the criminal investigation was initially done, because when we first got the complaint, before we look into anything, any allegation involves criminality, we do forward it over to IB. That investigation was done by their sexual assault unit, and once it was completed, then came back to us. So they did not find, I believe their findings, they did not find that the officer's action violated policy procedure. Well, there was no criminal allegations on that. And so when we got when we continued on, what we wanted to make sure of is that the allegation that she had just involved, it didn't involve the pat down, because her allegation involving the pat down was that she just felt it was improper by the officer touching her. Her allegation to us was the fact of it being rude. So that's when we continued on, just so to answer your question.
Thank you for that. And then if the complainant had made an allegation to you all in terms of she believed that it was an improper pat down, is there, or maybe, because in some cases you all like create an allegation as well, separate, even if that individual doesn't make a particular allegation. So I'm just wondering in this instance, why that particular situation wasn't further investigated. I understand the fact that the IAB looked into it and found it didn't rise to the level of criminality, but not clear whether or not there was a violation of potential violation of policy.
So if I'm answering your question correctly, the reason that we look at everything, but her allegation was she did not feel that her being pat down was improper. She felt that when she was pat down, that the officer touching her was an issue. And so when we continued our investigation, that was part of what we did ask her. And she said, no, she didn't have an issue with that. Her only issue when it came further to us was looking at the part of the officers that were conducting the criminal investigation, the fact of them being rude. So that was the part that we looked at. Sexual assault had already done the criminal investigation and found that the officers' actions did not arise to being criminal. So once they were complete, then we came back and finished ours. And we felt that the arrest and everything was all proper, but we were just looking at the part of how the officer's interaction with the complainant, whether or not it was rude and discourteous, or whether that violated CPD policy or procedure.
So, can you help me with the body-worn the absence of body-worn camera?
With the sergeant and the,
Yes.
and I don't know the rules behind that, but I
Yep.
don't think they're required.
Policy
So,
states that detectives don't have to wear body-worn cameras.
so both of these officers, when they came to the investigate, don't need body-worn cameras?
Incident, they didn't have to have body-worn cameras being detectives and investigating this, but what we were able to hear the investigator is they recorded the statements that they took with the complainant. So the investigator was able to listen to the recording of the statement, and that helped them be able to, that added more credibility to the feedback that we got, not just back from the sergeant, but also the other officer that was with the sergeant at the scene.
Board Member Younger had her hand up.
With the prior issue, so if a citizen has a criminal matter, it goes to internal affairs. Is that correct?
So what we do is anytime we get a complaint, and that complaint involves a criminal, it involves an allegation that could be criminal, we automatically forward that to IAB.
Okay.
And so IAB will forward that to whatever other division needs to investigate, but IAB is our contact.
That's your, okay.
Yeah.
If something had been found, just for purposes of education, would it go to the prosecutor's office, or would it go to the prosecutor's office?
Yep. If
Correct.
they had determined that there was a crime was committed, then they would move forward with charges.
Okay, thank you.
Now, going back to what you were stating about these two officers recording this interview, was that just wisdom, or was that a requirement?
I probably don't know, but I'm assuming that might have been their procedure, was to record a statement
Okay.
that they took from the.
I'm just asking that because we've got a number of cases where detectives were involved in some allegation, but they were not required to wear a body-worn camera. But I was wondering why their interaction was not recorded.
Well, they did visit the complainant at the complainant's house, and maybe that could be because the
Okay, that was the
complainant didn't come
difference.
into the station to make a statement.
All right.
And just by way of reminder, our subcommittee previously at a meeting made a recommendation, forwarded on, that the policy about that specifically, that detectives don't have to wear BWCs, be reviewed, because we had that.
Off-duty officers.
Well, that was going to be my next question. What about off-duty officers? Because
Well, they don't have to.
Yeah, but we also did a detective one too, because we had two separate scenarios. We had an off-duty, then we had, so we asked them to look at all the scenarios in which officers are not required to have body-worn cameras on. So just by way of reminding everyone, because this issue had come up multiple times, I do recall that we did make that recommendation, yeah. Any other discussion? So we've got a first and a second. All in favor, please raise your hands. Motion carries. Thank you. That is it for yours? Awesome. We're going to move to Team 2. I will note what we will do to ensure that we get a consensus from the board on our training. I will stop Board Member Strickland at 4:45, so we have the last 5 to 7 minutes just to touch on the training document for.
May I ask a question before we get to Board Member Strickland? Because of the number of cases, I wonder if we might have a conversation, we don't have to do it now, but before next time, regarding whether this procedure is the best way to handle this volume of cases. And that is, I wonder if we couldn't have a different procedure for reporting out. And specifically, if the subcommittees are, in agreement there, where there's no dispute, if those cases could be set aside as, and those cases that the subcommittee believes that there is something to discuss. Either that there is a recommendation of discipline for an officer, or there's some controversy regarding the case, whether it wouldn't be expedient for us to reduce the cases, because right now we're going through every case, including those that, in which there's, complete agreement right down the line. So I just wonder if we couldn't engage in some kind of sorting. That was my recommendation. But we could find some system to cut the number of cases and tier them so that we have complete board discussion on those cases that warrant complete board discussion.
So I will let you know that I did talk with Nate about doing this, which is part of the reason I asked you all to look for administrative closures first, because I figured those would be
Yeah.
quick. We could get those out of the way. Just by reminder, we do have to openly vote on each and every case. I think for streamlining purposes, we can talk about whether we can do a different job of summarizing them on our own. So whether we, do bullet points and say, here's the recommendations, here's the allegations, here's what was viewed, we agree, and then if board members have questions, we can do that. The IG did recommend we read the summaries that come from the IG's reports directly, the little 2 paragraphs in the front. And sometimes we do, but sometimes we then have additional questions after that. So I feel like we can. My goal would be to put administrative closures first, the cases we agree with in the middle, and cases we might disagree with at the end. But I think and maybe it's, if everybody can maybe try to do that for the next meeting, I think we might run into issues, though, because one subcommittee may not have disagreements, but then one of us may hear something that sparks a discussion in another case.
So I'm happy to use this time to talk to that point exactly, and because we're not going to get through my cases, but I will say, completely agree. I think one of the suggestions that I think we're going to discuss at the May meeting, or it's May. Can't believe it's May, everybody. The next meeting in June are going to be some of these recommendations and procedures. And I sent out a document that I think will be forwarded to the rest of the board just to this point, both in terms of the makeup of our subcommittees, but then also how we present out. I would suggest in terms of, cases that we go through, those administrative closure cases, I know we have to vote on every single case, but as far as something being more time sensitive than another, I think those to me seem less time sensitive. But I do think these other cases that are more sensitive, that have delicate situations, potential controversies that are worth discussing as a full board, I would like to have those discussions and prioritize discussion, full group board discussion for that. The other point I'll say is, if possible, a potential recommendation as well moving forward would be for when we get all of these cases, for that everybody on the board to be able to have just ready access to review those cases. Not that they would be required to, but I think that's helpful because, we get our subcommittee cases, and that's important. We see that, but it would be helpful if I wanted to dive deeper into one of the cases that was brought up, if we're able to read that ahead of time. So that would be an additional recommendation there.
So I don't even think that has to be a recommendation. I think at
We can
any
just do
point,
it.
any board member can ask Nate for all the cases if you'd like to have them, because you're allowed to have them.
Well, we've
Yeah.
had that done before, and I think everybody had, and I think except for one board member said that everybody else wanted just their cases.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
it was always left open that we could request all of them.
Yep.
Yeah.
And I would ask too, Board Member Strickland, we do have a person who's the center of a complaint who's watched the last 2 months, who, if we're able to get through at least that case from your group, that would be helpful. It's the first one, 220404. Would you be willing to?
220404.
Yeah, we had that, 220404.
Let me pull this up. Is that from April or from March?
That's a March review case.
Yes. This is 220404. Summary of this incident, on October 27, 2022, the complainant filed a complaint alleging misconduct by Columbus Police Accident Investigation Unit detective. The complainant alleged that the detective failed to notify her family that her niece had died as a result of a car accident that occurred on Thursday, October 13th, 2022. The family was not notified until Monday, October 17th, 2022. The complainant alleges that when the detective was asked why they were not promptly notified, he stated, quote, I guess it could have been done, end quote. The Columbus Department of Inspector General reviewed statements presented by the complainant and the complainant's sister, body-worn camera footage, computer-aided dispatch records, and CPD policy procedures. In regard to allegation 1, the complainant's niece, the victim, was in a 2-car accident at the intersection of Holt and Brittenell Avenues on Thursday, October 13, 2022. The patrol officer came upon the accident and notified the police dispatcher at 9:32 p.m. The niece was not identified by officers at the scene. Medics transported the victim to Grant Medical Center at 9:40 p.m. in critical condition. AIU was notified of the accident. The AIU detective responded and processed the scene, then released the scene after his investigation was complete. The detective was not able to identify the victim at that time. The victim died in the early morning of Friday, October 14, 2022. The detective's regularly scheduled days off are Friday and Saturday. While the subject detective was off work, another AIU detective received a message from the coroner's office indicating the victim had died and placed a handwritten message on the subject detective's desk. On the subject detective's next scheduled day on duty, the detective made a formal records request for the coroner's reports and notified the family of the victim on Monday, October 17, 2022. Therefore, it is recommended that the allegation of police misconduct concerning actions not taken by the AIU subject detective be closed as exonerated, as their actions were supported by CPD policies, procedures, and/or laws. But then they go on further to say that the Inspector General recommends that CDP review their policies and procedures about CPD's processes for the notification of family / next of kin once CPD has been notified by the coroner's office about a deceased person who is part of an investigation by CPD. In addition, it is recommended that the investigation report be forwarded to the City of Columbus Director of Public Safety and Chief of Police for review and consideration regarding the recommendation. That was something that our subcommittee discussed, that we were concerned about the process of just a detective leaving a Post-it note on the desk, and it seems that other actions could have been taken to ensure that the family was notified sooner. And so we recommend, with this review of the process and the policy of notifying next of kin. And that was the discussion that we had as a subcommittee and as a group. So I would make a motion to accept the Inspector General's recommendation here of exonerated by that particular officer. However, with the additional recommendation of a review of policy and procedures regarding the notification of families and next of kin once CPD has been notified by the coroner's office. And I would recommend it. Yeah, I don't know what the current policy says, but I think there should be a change if that's within policy. But that would be my recommendation for case number 0404.
So we've got a motion on the floor. Do I have a second? Second. And a quick advice question. Given that because we had this discussion earlier, we've got an exonerated for that initial officer, should we split this into 2 recommendations? Because I believe the Post-it note was officer number 2, not the officer who was the original subject of the complaint. Is that correct?
Yep. Yeah.
Okay.
But this is in the report. This is in there.
Oh, no, I know. I think, though, the preference is if the officer who the complaint was originally alleged against is exonerated, that we separate it out if what we're making is a policy recommendation on, like if we're telling them to change policy, but not asking for discipline on this specific officer.
I have a point of clarification, though. Was the recommendation for policy, was that presented by the IG's office, though?
Yes.
Yeah, so I would just.
So that was all together how it was presented?
It was, and the IG and I have discussed this. I think this is prior to her change, but
Okay.
she will likely start separating those out too in her reports.
Okay.
That
Okay.
way, everything is clean.
Okay.
Okay. Board Member Strickland, can I just amend it then to accept the exoneration and then we hold the second as a second? I just want to make it clean and consistent so that we're not doing different things for different cases.
I mean, okay. I mean, I think it seems less clean, but but we are separating them out. I'm just trying to get some clarification as why we need to.
Because you want to keep any findings with regard to the investigation separate and apart from general recommendations with regard to policy and/or training from CPD. So her report, which at some point will not have recommendations with regard to broader policy and training, is only going to be specific to whatever the investigation was for the subject officer or officers, and then separate from that. And you can always refer to it, right? Like
Yeah.
if you don't want it to be some sort of blind recommendation to CPD, you can say in reference to complaint, DIG complaint number, such and such, we make a recommendation that policy be reviewed with regard to how victims are notified of deaths or something like that.
So thank you for that. And so the question I think I would have specifically on this, though, would be, was the actions by the other officer, the other AIU detective, was that a violation of policy, or is that were they within policy? Because if that's the case, then couldn't there be a sustained, kind of a DIG sustained allegation against a particular AIU detective in this case?
The actions by the other officer were all within policy and
okay.
procedures.
Yeah.
I know that, but I'm saying we need to make that clear that both officers were within policy.
It's the,
Yeah.
which
Okay.
I think they need to add to the.
If we need to do the separate, if we need to separate, because that's the way it gets done, I'm happy to make that happen. But I do think, I would like to reference, as you mentioned, the point that, why we're talking about this particular incident, because that is specific to the allegation that was made here.
Oh, yeah, I think you can. I just remembered Attorney Ross said earlier, you don't want to risk having your recommendation thrown out because what it's tied to is a report that says exonerated.
So I understand that piece. Why would a recommendation get thrown out? I don't understand. It's the recommendation that the police chief they could make I'm just confused. Why would that get thrown out?
So it depends on what you're recommending, I will say that. So the prior example, there was recommendation of training. But training is a level of discipline, like remedial training is a level of discipline, which would only be recommended if you're going to sustain an allegation of misconduct. So if you're going to exonerate an officer, but you still want training to be done, particularly not in particular to that officer, but particular to the entire CPD, then you want to separate that out from the investigation of misconduct for a specific officer. And then you can use that same theory for policy recommendations as well, with the understanding that if you would like context for CPD to look at, you can just refer to, this particular act was investigated by the DIG. While we were reviewing said investigation, we noticed that there was a policy that we would like to be reviewed. You can do that, but you don't want it in the specific officer's report, because again, that has its own separate process. It's going to go through its own separate process. You want to keep that clean, separate and apart from any general policy recommendations. And that is just my advice. You don't have to accept it.
Yeah, no, so I understand from that perspective. I would, however, from the complainant's perspective, if somebody, if this is they're wondering what the outcome for their particular complaint is, and they see that it's exonerated, that's one thing. But then they also see that there is a recommendation for a review of the policy. Like, I guess if you're the complainant, you would want to know what is happening with that particular policy that was
And I think the board can create a policy or procedure to account for that. So in the event you're going to make a recommendation that an officer be exonerated, but you want your complainant to have additional information with regard to board action as a result, then you can provide maybe a letter to the complainant to say, this is what happened, even though we're exonerating the officer, because right now, policy doesn't account for the officer's actions, we are going to make a recommendation to CPD. But again, remember that when you are looking at an investigative finding, like all of this is a part of contractual obligations for that specific officer, has to go through a specific chain of command and review and process. You want to try to keep that clean and separate apart from your other board duties, which are to recommend policy changes and procedures. And they could be informed by a particular investigation, but it doesn't necessarily have to be in the report.
I think too, Kyle, that what would be great, just like in this circumstance, when we make this policy recommendation to CPD, is the feedback. That's what, if I'm the complainant, I want to hear what happened. You know, you made a recommendation, what became of it?
Yeah.
And I think we have a responsibility to find that out.
Yep. I completely agree.
So, can I have just a little clarification? I apologize if you have to repeat something, but as to the Post-it note, the officer with the Post-it note, what are we doing at this particular time? Was he acting within policy, or?
Yes.
He was acting within policy when he left that Post-it note?
There was nothing wrong with the fact that there was a phone call that was made to that unit regarding the update on a case. All of the investigators there have different cases. All that officer did was take that information and provide that information to that investigator, which is the same thing they would have done to any investigator handling that case. So it was not earnest upon that investigator to take that information and do something specific with it. So that's why, for us, part of, and we'll start doing like a separate letter, that we're making a letter or a suggestion that in the case like this, if there is a notification that comes from the coroner's office, instead of that specifically just going to the investigator handling that specific case, maybe someone needs to look at that and take some action. But as most cases, even in my own office, our investigators are assigned cases that they're responsible for. And so any information that someone would receive regarding that case goes specifically to that investigator. It is, I understand that, the information came from the coroner's office, but if we just look at the fact that what happened was information came in regarding an investigator's case, that information was received, and that information was just passed on to the investigator for the investigator to handle it at their very next
If I
day.
understand correctly, the original investigator, that was his days off.
It was his day off, right. And as soon as he came back to work, he saw the information and acted upon it.
And where the policy fail is if it's your days off, for God's sakes, let somebody else make the call.
Absolutely, yes, right, especially in a case like this.
So I'm gonna put a hold on this here because we have 2 minutes and we want to get our new 3 board members trained so that they can actually start moving towards joining us at this table. So I apologize. I apologize also to the complainant, case number 0404. I promise that will be the very first thing that we do in our June meeting.
Can we vote on this?
Hold on though. Okay, but we still have to split it into 2 separate motions.
I'll do that
We still
quickly.
have to let our IT folks get out because they have a press conference that starts. Okay.
I'll do that quickly.
So if you could, if you could
Yeah, so
draft those 2 separate, that would be great.
I would agree with the IG's recommendation of exonerated for allegation 1, that particular detective failed to notify the family.
Second.
Leave it at that, I guess.
All right, all in favor, please raise your hands. Motion carries. Next motion.
I would make a motion to separately, however we're doing this, to recommend that CDP review their I would actually, can I just make to change their, I make a recommendation that they change their policies or practices as it relates to notification of families / next of kin once CPD has been notified by the coroner's office about a deceased person who is part of an investigation by CPD.
Any seconds?
Second.
All in favor, please raise your hands. Motion carries. Thank you. All right, turning it over briefly to Dr. Jones. She has already passed out and provided for each of us a list of all the trainings that we partook in as board members. If you could please take a look, take about 30, 45 seconds. If there are any trainings in that list that you think our new board members should not have to also take, that is what you can give some input to Dr. Jones now, so that we can go ahead and schedule our new board members' viewings of these, so they can get their ride-alongs and their academy trainings also scheduled as well.
Right. We have taken a lot of training. So if you see, it's the bulleted list under Civilian Review Board training. So just, if there are any that you think they do not need, please let me know, so that way we can get them all squared away and scheduled so they can join us during these meetings. If you remember, we had Officer Rick Hanna provide the ABCs of policing. We did Furby, he did a search and seizure training. We had implicit bias and cultural competency that was facilitated by the city of Columbus. We also had training on board rules and regulations and professional standards. Commander Lang did de-escalation. We had the Mobile Crisis Unit and the Right Response Unit come in and do a training. We had the NACO training, which was the external individuals that came in. And then we had two different trainings. One was by Mrs. Morash on the investigation review. She did part 2, I did part 1. And then you had our wonderful attorneys provided a training over City Work Rule number 8. And then in addition to that, we all did the academy training where we did those scenarios, and then we each should have done a ride-along as well. And so what we're looking for is whether or not our new members do not need any of those trainings.
And then how does this connect to the maybe onboarding that you'll be providing?
So I'm going to just say, stick to the meat and potatoes first, because that's what they need to get installed. And then you can do some of the other trainings after they've already been installed. So when I'm looking at 235.01C, that's basically the police tactics, that's the ABCs of policing. And then we're talking about the ride-alongs, the seminars on relevant constitutional and criminal law, and then de-escalation, diversity, inclusion, cultural competency, and implicit bias. That's it. Make sure they've got those hammered out. I mean, June's probably unrealistic. You know, in July, the meeting is going to be pushed back a couple weeks because of the holiday, so that's more realistic. So the anticipation should be that they should get those meat and potatoes trainings done so that they can be installed at the July meeting.
Got it.
And then whatever, all those other trainings, I mean, again, you guys do what you want, but they should take all those other trainings, but they can do them after they've been installed.
We agree.
No, that's helpful.
We agree.
Because we weren't aware of which ones they didn't have to take in order to be able to start
I mean,
participating.
Janet didn't forward you the email that I gave to her? Oversight, I'm sure it was an oversight.
So is everybody good with that?
All good.
All right, perfect.
Great.
Thank
If you have
you.
not responded to Nate already about the July dates, please do so that we can get that scheduled. Otherwise, we will.
Are there new cases being assigned?
Yes, they're actually already in your agenda. Nate went ahead and put those in the agenda ahead of time.
Do we have
So
to
he will
announce that?
mail them out to each of us.
Do we have to announce that publicly or no?
I don't know that I
Announce
do,
what?
but I will read them out loud. Team 1 is cases 197, 199, 207, 213, 258, 276, 2833, 305, 325, 348. Team 2, 082, 083, 098, 099, 0111, 0119, 0121, 154, 174, 194. Team 3, 556, 001, 022, 027, 050, 057, 061, 072, 073, 076.
Thank you.
All right.
Thanks to the IG's office.
Can I have a motion to adjourn? So moved. Any seconds? All in favor, please raise your hands. Thank you.